Ladies, gentlemen, please take your seats. The spotlight is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mystery Matt, and you're listening to the Mystery Matt Spotlight Podcast. This evening, we're getting into a topic that I've wanted to do for a while, without me actually having to do the research or the work. So I got two of the best ones we got over here doing the research. So everybody say hello to Nancy and Sarah.
Hi.
Hello.
So this evening we are talking about Jack the Ripper. Male or female, we don't know. We'll get into it soon enough, I guess.
Were you trying to make that rhyme?
Yeah, I was, and it just didn't. Yeah, wah. Yeah.
Epic fail.
Epic fail. So yeah, he's British, right?
Yes.
British from about like 130 something years ago or something.
136 years ago.
Oh, okay, I'm close.
Wow, that added to it.
We gotta get some WD for that or something.
I think it kind of added to it. It's like,
What? No, I'm doing a podcast. Currently.
we're live.
Yeah. Yeah, you're famous.
That's our neighbor Kevin, everybody.
Fucking neighbors. We're doing Jack the Ripper. And in Britain, Jack the Ripper do you.
The fuck?
It's like a Mother Russia thing.
Yeah. Okay, let Nancy go.
All right, so we're going to set the scene here. 1888 in Whitechapel, which was east end of London, from what I understand. The Whitechapel murders, which was what they were referred to, took place in or near the impoverished Whitechapel district between April 3rd, 1888 and February 13th, 1891. Whitechapel in 1888 was a place of extreme poverty, unsanitary living conditions, and a unique and diverse local culture. It was a large population of working class folks trying to make ends meet. One of the defining features of Whitechapel was the squalid living conditions. The population had increased rapidly due to the growth of the industry, and many lived in cramped and unsanitary conditions, entire families often sharing a single room. These rooms lacked proper ventilation, and diseases such as TB and cholera were prevalent. Sanitation was a major issue.
I thought you said TV. And I'm like, of course they don't have TV. And then I'm like, oh,
tuberculosis.
TB. Got it. All right, yeah. The tuberculosis.
That's how it is.
Sanitation was a major issue. Many streets were lined with open sewers and garbage. Wages were low and unemployment was common. Most residents, if working, worked on the docks or in the factories. The population was made up of immigrants, Irish, Jewish, and Eastern European. And white... Where am I?
Whoa, easy.
My brain just... Whitechapel. Sorry, my brain stopped.
Whitechapel. Okay,
My brain
you're
just completely
lucky.
stopped. I'm like, what am I talking about?
Brain fart.
You realize how white I am?
Whitechapel was a very short cab ride from London, to give you an idea.
Oh, okay.
Hang on.
Next section.
Next section.
Next section, please.
So, just to recap, this was before I Love Lucy came out.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have TV.
Or Lucille Ball.
I don't even think they really had electricity. Weren't they still on oil lamps and stuff?
Yeah, the streets were lined usually by oil lamps, so they were like, street lights were literally like little candles. Kind of a unique era.
And there was a guy that went around and lit them all.
Yep.
He got
Sorry.
replaced by robots.
My apologies. The series of fatal stabbings that escalated into total mutilation was a very specific type of victim, and you'll soon find out who. This was the first time the Victorians had ever faced or had to deal with such an emotionally charged phenomenon.
Next section, please.
Next section, I
Do
apologize.
do do do. Do 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 do.
So the reasons why these murders continue to fascinate, above all others, they represent a real-life mystery from a Sherlock Holmes era. At the same time the murders were happening in the East End, the comfortable and high-end West End was being entertained by a melodrama based on Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Together, these two events, one safely fanciful and the other horrifying and real, gave many their first dawning awareness of the potential for inherent evil.
Someone just fart? What happened?
In so-called ordinary or normal people. A tremendous amount of manpower and resources on the parts of the two police forces at the time, and ripperologists, in quotes.
Ripperologist?
In a more than 136 years later, the crimes remain unsolved. So when I was reading your book, it said 110 years, and then I figured it out. It was 136 years we're talking about this still.
Still.
I think 90 or 2001.
There's a hair on my microphone, so if you hear something, that's me picking at it.
Jack the Ripper created the myth, the evil archetype, and the serial killer.
Is it a myth, though, or does it originate in history?
Created the myth of Jack the Ripper.
So Jack the Ripper itself is a myth of the person who actually committed the crimes. Because technically speaking, we don't know if his real name is Jack or if he just named himself that.
Well, that's like the Unabomber. They named it. Media named him.
Which the media should never name serial killers because it gives them that infamous fame that they have been looking for. Don't do that. Don't name serial killers.
So you can all imagine that living in that time was not a very nice place to live. Oh.
Dude, we have drinks here. Sorry, we had to pause for WD-40. And they are not an official sponsor.
Maybe they should be.
Ah. Great, I gotta smell that. Smell it all the fucking time.
There we go. So living there would not be a very safe, comfortable place to be, or clean.
No.
So we are going to get into our timeline and our victims. Our first victim, Marianne Nichols, aka Polly. Do you want me to? Do you want to?
You can say Polly.
Okay.
Polly, why just Polly?
So
What's going on over here?
she named herself Polly. So you're going to find as we talk about the victims, a lot of them had other names that they named themselves.
For street names.
Street names.
Oh, these are madams of the evening.
Yes.
Ladies of the night,
So
if you
that
will.
was the typical victim, was the prostitutes. And prostitution was very high
Pence for a poke kind of people.
within Whitechapel because there wasn't a lot of work. So they did what they could to get by.
You want me to go?
Where are you going?
Yep, so Marianne Nichols was born Marianne Walker in 1845.
Texas Ranger.
She was married to William Nichols, but separated from her husband and her 5 children because of her alcoholism. In early August 1888, Marianne found herself in London's East End and would bounce from one common house to another, usually between 2 lodgings, both costing 4 pence a night. She was a small woman of only 5'2" and had 5 missing teeth. She was considered what they would call an unfortunate, which was a woman who might have to turn to casual prostitution to make ends meet. That's exactly what she needed to do on the night of August 30th, 1888. She had made the money twice over earlier, and I think I'm probably getting into Nancy's stuff, and drank it all. Her friend Emily Holland met up with her around 2:30 on the 31st near a shop in Osborne, Whitechapel, and 45 minutes later, Nichols' body was found. She was 42 years old, and she was put to rest on September 6, 1888. And she was identified by her eldest son, Edward Nichols, and her father, Edward Walker.
So at 3:40 in the morning, 2 carmen, or wagon drivers, Charles A. Cross and Robert Paul, were walking to work along Bucks Row, a block from London Hospital in Whitechapel, on Whitechapel Road. Cross thought he saw a tarp on the other side of the street near the entrance to the stables. As he wandered over, he saw that it was a body of a woman. Her eyes were wide, hands by her side, skirt hiked up to her waist, and legs slightly parted. Next to the body was a black velvet trimmed straw bonnet. Cross called Robert over. He felt the woman's face, which was still warm, leading him to believe... Page turn.
Page turn.
We need somebody
Please stand by.
assistants to do this for us.
Right.
Yeah.
We need a teleprompter.
Yeah.
That one.
That she might still
You
be
can
alive.
just constantly scroll. Yeah. Sarah's got a teleprompter.
I'm my own. I don't have
Nancy's old-fashioned.
Yes, I am. He listened for a heartbeat, but felt her hands, and they were cold, and concluded she was dead. The two men called the police. The Metropolitan Police Constable Jonas Misen, walking on nearby Hanbury Street, told him what they had found. They met Constable John Neal at the scene, where he had stumbled upon it on his own. Another constable, Constable John Thane, was flagged. Thane went to find Dr. Reese Ralph Llewellyn, the closest GP. Misen secured an ambulance, which was a two-wheeled wagon, long enough to hold a stretcher. Dr. Llewellyn noted severe lacerations to the victim's throat, a little blood on or around the body. The woman was pronounced dead at 3:50 a.m., noting that since her legs were still warm, time of death was approximately 30 minutes prior to being discovered. She had been killed on the spot.
Wow.
The body was taken to the mortuary at the old Montague Street Workhouse Infirmary. Inspector John Spratling arrived around 4:30 a.m. Crowds started forming as the news of the murder started spreading. Spratling told the other officers to search the scene and surrounding area, then began recording his official description of the corpse. Spratling discovered, once the corpse had been disrobed, that the stomach had been ripped open and intestines were exposed. The following morning, Llewellyn completed a complete post-mortem. He noted bruising on the face and neck, and a circular incision on the neck that completely severed all the tissues down to the vertebrae, as well as major blood vessels of the neck. The deep cuts appeared to have been made with a sharp, long-bladed knife. Llewellyn believed the killer had some rough and anatomical knowledge. From a thumb's bruise on the right side of the neck, he thought that he might be left-handed. What was the book? Because I'm quoting something from the book. What was your book called? The Cases That Haunt Us?
Yes, by John Douglas.
So, the book that I was reading to get all this information from talked about behavioral clues. The severe bruising about the face suggests the initial blitz. By the way, it was very informative.
It was. I love his books.
Yeah, the blitz-style attack attempted to neutralize the victim quickly and unexpectedly, suggested an offender who was unsure of himself, no confidence in his ability to control her, and an adequate personality, as opposed to one with confidence to think he can easily dominate women. Should I stop?
No, keep going.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I might have different.
Okay. The neck bruising indicates an attempt to choke the victim. Multiple deep stab wounds suggest a frenzy of anger and generally released sexual tension. With the face not suffering any wounds means he could have not known the victim. The deep circular incision around the neck, an attempt to decapitate the victim, being that the killer appeared to decapitate in the street, unorganized and not all there, in quotes, goes with the ripping open of the belly. Someone who hates women and has a curiosity of the human body, characterized as demented. And you talked about naming of the victim.
Yes.
So detectives were stumped with the absence of motives which led to the violence and of any scrap of evidence, either direct or circumstantial. Their lack of experience with this type of crime still labeled the work of a sex offender. So I didn't understand this part. So I didn't understand how they linked it to be sexual.
Because a lot of these gruesome things are done out of sexual gratification, even though it's a really disgusting kink.
So a lot of the times when you have an unsub or unknown subject who suffers from sexual inadequacies, the unable to get it up, so to speak, or impotence, stabbing and using a knife symbolizes the thrusting motion of sex, and therefore gives them that sexual gratification. And they are actually the reason they can't get an erection for normal sexual activity is because they can't form the natural bonds that a man and a woman or a man and a man or whatever can. So the only way for them to be able to get off is to actually kill somebody, and they're getting off by that motion. That's what makes a sexual offender. However, I will probably change this in my profile section when we get there, because it's not a sexually deviant crime as one would think.
It's kind of like someone who's into fisting, and then you give them like a midget dick.
It's kind of like a paraphilic behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, people like clowns. People like... Oh, yeah, people are into all kinds of messed up stuff.
We'll find that out during the cult stuff, too.
There was a...
Little old lady who lived in a shoe.
There was a thought that Nichols' murder was related to an earlier prostitute murder in the East End, but they didn't have anything to link this.
Yeah, I will talk about it.
So our second victim is Martha Tabram, a.k.a. Emma Turner.
Okay, hang on. Skip her, because she was not an official victim. She's an alleged victim, and I cover that later.
Okay, so we're going to go then to Annie.
We're just covering
Chapman?
we're just covering the main 5 known victims. And then when we go into the other victims, which you told me to cover, I talk about them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Maybe we should have like
we should have
meetings or something.
Well, we did, but I didn't know she was going to cover those ones.
Someone shouldn't have skipped live stream day.
Fuck off. She wouldn't have been able to do it anyways. But no, because remember we decided that the other victims fall under me, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just confused.
Yeah, there's naturally only 5 victims.
Oh, okay.
5 known victims and some alleged victims.
Because some of them were, like, some of the websites
On
were
mic.
saying 6.
On mic.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Okay, so we're going to go to... You can edit all that.
I'm not going to. That's the thing. I don't edit no more.
Oh, my goodness.
No. What you say is what we get, kids. That's why we're leaving in some
All
of
right,
the
then.
dirtier jokes, too. I said it too explicit. Whatever.
So then we're going to move to Annie Chapman.
Oh, that's me.
That's you.
That's you. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Well, that was really loud. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I don't think you peeked out because of the limiters I have in place.
Okay, good. So Annie Chapman was born Eliza Ann Smith in 1841, and her nickname was Dark Annie. She left her husband, John Chapman, and her children...
Now, was that for racial reasons?
No.
Okay, good.
She left her husband, John Chapman, and her children when her alcoholism got out of control. He would continue to send her an allowance until his death in 1886, so Annie would support herself by selling her own crochet work and also by selling matches and flowers. Only on occasion would she resort to prostitution. Annie was considered to be an inoffensive soul and had cordial relationships with people in the common houses that she often frequented. She normally stayed at Crossingham. She had brown hair and blue eyes and was just 5'2". Annie hadn't been feeling well and had been in the infirmary. She was clearly suffering from malnutrition and had chronic disease of the lungs and membrane surrounding her brain. She was not well. She was not a well woman. It was because of her condition that Timothy Donovan, who was the caretaker at Crossingham Lodgings, allowed her to sit in the kitchen on the night of September 7th until just after midnight. When she couldn't produce the 4 pence to procure a bed, he asked her to leave. She vowed she would be back and asked him to save her a bed. At 5:30 a.m., she was seen talking to a man. Just a half hour later, her body was found. Found in her pockets was 2 combs, a piece of muslin, a folded envelope with 2 pills, and 2 farthing coins were found near her body. Her younger brother, Fountain Smith, was the one who had to identify her body, and she was put to rest on September 14th, 1888, and she was 48 years old.
So they're all ladies of the night and around 40-ish.
I think she's the older one. She's the oldest one, I think, of all of them. I think the youngest was 40. No, the youngest was 25. Yeah, she was the last one. Was the youngest one. But they were all prostitutes.
That's because all the old ones were already killed off.
Well, then
The 25-year-old one was
they
a
didn't
new
live
hire.
very long.
Well, yeah, with all the tuberculosis.
Don't forget cholera.
Yay, color and syphilis.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of syphilis.
There was lots of syphilis.
Doesn't sound like a very nice place to be.
No.
No, and all the horses shat in the road, so
Yeah.
there was, all that, right? Shat.
So just before 6 a.m., Carmen John Davis finally got up after a restless night, left the third-floor flat he shared with his wife and 3 sons at 29 Hanbury Street, went downstairs to the outside privy. He saw a woman laying on her back between the fence and the steps. Her dress had been pulled up over her head, belly ripped open with her intestines pulled out and draped over her left shoulder.
Oh.
Yeah. Isn't that a nice sight to wake up to and wander outside?
Oh, yeah, lovely.
Darling, get the broom. There's a prostitute dead in the yard again. Like, what the fuck?
Right? Imagine going out for a smoke and, like, that's where there's, like, intestines laying around. You're like, oh, well, good morning.
Yeah, I hope we're not having sausage links for dinner tonight.
Like, oh my God, right? Like,
Yeah.
darling, get the dog.
Yeah. Joseph Chandler was first on site. He discovered the body, sent for Dr. George Baxter Phillips, the police surgeon for the H Division. Phillips examined the brutally butchered but ritualistically arranged corpse he described. Left arm placed across left breast, legs drawn up, feet resting on the ground, knees turned outwards, face swollen and turned to the right side. Tongue protruded between the front teeth but not beyond the lips. Tongue was evidently swollen. Front teeth were perfect as far as the first molar, top and bottom. Apparently she had good teeth.
Oh. Ironic for London.
Yeah. The body was terribly mutilated. Throat was dissevered deeply. Incisions through the skin were jagged and reached around the neck. Smears of blood were found on the wood in the yard, corresponding to where the head of the deceased lay.
Hang on. You said jagged.
Yeah.
Which suggests hesitation, which makes no sense if the first murder, because you would expect to see hesitation marks in the first murder, not so much in the second.
That's because he was so confused about how good her teeth were.
Oh, maybe. Sorry, I just want to put that out.
Me too. Brush your teeth with Colgate. Colgate Dental Cream. Sorry. No sponsor.
Squirrel! Wounds appear to be made by a sharp, narrow blade. The evisceration indicated some medical knowledge.
Makes sense.
Speculated that the mutilations may have taken as long as an hour. Was attacked and neutralized before she could fight back. Inspector Frederick George Aberline of Scotland Yard's H Division was quickly on the scene, and he was quite the legend in the police circles. Aberline would come to take charge of the Whitechapel investigation. The woman's pocket contents that Sarah talked about were found placed, interestingly, around the body. Dr. Phillips told the inquest that he believed the pocket items were laid out with care. 2 coins were found by the body. This detail kept secret from the police. By the police, sorry. By the police. So I'm not going to go into profiling. Because that was that.
It's hard not to, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love the profiling.
Yeah, so, yeah. It was a brutal, frenzied attack with careful ritualistic elements. I'm going to say indicates a need for control or master small, discrete components of the crime scene or victim.
Matt's got a question.
I have a question. Did any of the victims have any coins over their eyes?
No.
No. Okay, carry on.
But sorry, he did have the items that were in her pocket kind of laid out beside her. So the earrings were laid beside the head. The comb was like beside her hand. Like it was kind of all laid out before he walked away.
Yeah, all right. If you have a diagram, I'd love to see one.
So I did take some screenshots of the website that I was working on so I can send them. So based on, did I say this already? Based on Dr. Phillips' description of the murder scene at Hanbury Street, the police were dealing with a similar type of offender. Would not have had sufficient comprehension to realize it, though. And the profile that, oh no, I'll leave that to you.
This is why scripts suck.
Listen,
It's hard.
it's been a hell of a flippin' week.
It's hard to do true crime without one because you need to be able to make sure everything's detailed properly.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to do it. Unless you have an eidetic memory, you can't do it. And
No.
I'm pretty sure I don't, and I'm pretty sure Nancy doesn't.
No.
Oh, my brain's not working at all.
I think you're doing fine just the same.
He's just being a dick.
All right.
He's got his dick
Amateur.
pants on. Do.
Go change your pants.
They're fresh from yesterday's Comic-Con.
Dr. Phillips had the unidentified body moved to the Whitechapel Infirmary mortuary, conducted a full postmortem, confirmed his earlier observations. The laceration of the laceration wounds of the neck show that the killer had tried to separate the various bones of the neck after the death, similar to Polly Nichols. Not only have the intestines been removed and draped over the shoulder, the uterus, half the vagina, and most of the bladder had been removed, and they were not found on the body or at the scene.
Or at all?
Or at all.
Yeah.
And
let's just cover all of them.
That's when the doctors were like, well, we think someone's taking anatomical souvenirs. Do you want me to go into what that means? The removal of the...
She had such beautiful lips.
So the removal of the uterus and vagina suggests that someone who hates women and probably fears them, attempting in a sense to neuter her and take away what he finds sexually threatening. The victim was identified as Annie Chapman by a washerwoman friend named Amelia Palmer.
See, that's not even as easy as cutting a dick off. You know what I mean? Like, you got to get in there, man. Like, that's not a... Well, I guess that's why it took him an hour.
Well, sexually disfiguring a woman is definitely going to take some skill.
You would have to have...
It's going to take a lot of time because, like you said, you're cutting through flesh, and whether these women were petite framed or larger framed also matters. Because let's face it, if you're fuller framed, it's going to take you a little bit to cut through everything to get to the stuff that you want to take. Right?
Yeah.
And skin is not easy to cut through. So it's going to take time. It's going to take precision and some type of knowledge of medical.
But this is the 1800s. I don't know how sharp they'd be or how well
It was most likely a scalpel.
Yeah.
Oh God, the sun's coming out. I can't see my fucking screen. Anyways.
Well, and also to go with what you said, if the killer was unorganized and frenzied with like the Blitz style attack, then it would make more sense that he went for petite women, because a bigger woman would be harder to dominate and take down. We fight back. That's why you're supposed to eat cake.
Yeah.
You don't get kidnapped.
Eat cake, no kidnapping.
So her death was very similar to that of Polly's. And did you talk about how she was denied a bed and everything as well?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I moved on to the next person on my list.
Panic began to spread across the East End as someone was murdering women. Police seemed unable to stop him. The East End began flooding with reporters. The sites of each murder became a tourist attraction.
And still is.
Yeah. And so the home office at that time was they had advised for the local police department to put out like a reward, but because everybody was so scrapped for money, they were afraid that they would just start calling in random things just for money. So they decided not to do that. The doctor that examined the bodies thought that the killer could have been a med student, as there seemed to be a fascination with autonomy. And there was suspicions. There was a leather apron found by her body, but they weren't sure whether it was part of it. But then rumors began to fly that it was like a local, I forget what they said he was. Butcher? But yeah, and that he wasn't a very honorable man that frequented the prostitutes. So there was rumors of that as well.
Yeah, I don't think they could ever connect it.
No. So, fourth victim.
All right. Elizabeth Stride was born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter on November 27th, 1842 in Sweden. She and her family emigrated to England in 1866, and in March of 1869 she married John Thomas Stride. The two moved to the East End of London, where they would open up a coffee shop. The two separated in 1877, and Elizabeth stayed in the area and resided in many of the common lodgings. Like the first two victims, Elizabeth was a heavy drinker and had a criminal record for many drunken disorderlies. She was feisty, and she had become involved in a relationship with Michael Kidney. So she was interred on October 6th, 1888.
1888, so the same year. How many are we up to in that same year? 3?
3 so far.
Yeah. So 1 a.m. on Sunday, September 30th, 1888, Louis Diemschutz, returning to the Workmen's Educational Club, he was driving a small pony cart. He noticed a small bundle against the gate. He thought she was just drunk, but examining her more closely realized her throat had been slashed. Dr. William Blackwell arrived at 1:16 a.m., pronounced her dead, and stated she had only been for about 20 minutes. And he believed she had been killed standing up.
Oh, wow.
Her head had been forced backwards by the silk kerchief around her neck, and her throat was cut. There was a lot of blood on the scene. Defense wounds on her hands shows there was a struggle. Mary Malcolm was convinced that it was her sister Elizabeth Watts. However, that was not correct. So these in the book were... Okay.
Is everybody?
That's it for what I have for that one.
Okay.
That's everybody?
So I can kind of go in a little bit on that one. Is that they believe that her murder was interrupted, which is why you only see the throat slashing and not the evisceration that you had seen in the previous 2 cases.
Or the removing of the organs.
Right. So it is allegedly surmised that the gentleman who came across her body with the horse and buggy interrupted the murder and left the murderer unsatisfied. So later that same night, he found another victim, and her name was Catherine Eddowes, who was born in Wolverhampton on April 14th, 1842. And her family moved to London when she was young. When her parents died while she was in mid-teens, she went back to Wolverhampton to live with her aunt, away from her siblings. While there, she met a soldier named Thomas Conway, and they may have married, but there is nothing to prove that they were. Together they had 3 children, and Catherine had his initials TC tattooed on her arm. Together they sold chapbooks, and in late 1870s moved to London. Like the previous 3 victims, Catherine began to drink heavily, which would exasperate her temperament. The couple separated multiple times before finally separating for good in 1880. Her sister said that Conway was abusive. She moved to Cooley's...
Conway Twitty?
No, Thomas Conway. She moved to Cooley's Common Lodgings House in 1881, met John Kelly, who was a casual laborer. The couple lived together until her death. She was remembered as a jolly woman who would often be heard singing away. Kelly last saw Eddowes around 2 p.m. in the afternoon on September 29th. She would find herself arrested and locked up to sober up. Just after midnight, they would let her out, and she was believed to be clear-headed. She was 43 years old, and she was buried October 8th, 1888.
So the morning she was found, 146 Constable Watkins began his tour of the square. He discovered a body. A woman was lying on her back in a pool of blood. He saw her throat had been slashed, dress pulled up above her waist, abdomen split open, and intestines pulled out. Dr. Brown arrived at 2 a.m. and conducted his examination. A thimble was lying near one of the victim's fingers on the right side. Intestines positioned over her right shoulder. Uterus and kidneys had been removed from the body and were not on the scene. Face and right ear had been severely mutilated, appeared to be deliberate, ritualistic manner, unlike the random slashing and cutting of the rest of the body. Death would have been imminent or immediate from hemorrhage from the carotid artery. And all mutilations were inflicted post-mortem.
Of course. It's easier that way. They squirm less. And they bleed less, too, because the heart stopped already.
Yes. So being that both were found in the same night, the police went out full force, covered the area, trying to catch the killer. They even had dressed up as like a prostitute to see if they could lure the killer into
live bait.
Yeah, trying again.
I didn't know that because I didn't look into that, but that's interesting that they would do an undercover that early in 1888, that they would think about doing undercover.
You gotta get a little closer.
Do I need to repeat it?
No, but you're good.
Okay, yeah, because I didn't know that because I didn't investigate, or I didn't research this part because it was Nancy's, so I didn't know that. So that was interesting. The interesting factoid.
We ready to go to number 6?
Oh, you want me? Okay.
Oh, number 6. That's all so hard.
Technically
I can't-
speaking, number 5.
Number 5.
So, there wasn't
Number
a lot of
5.
information that has been confirmed about victim number 5, Mary Jane Kelly, except what she allegedly told her boyfriend, Joseph Barnett. She was born Marie Jeanette Kelly in 1863, and she told Barnett that she was from Limerick, Ireland, and her father was John Kelly, not the guy who was with Eddowes, and that she had 6 brothers and 1 sister. She also told him that they moved to Wales when she was just a child, and that she met and married a collier named either Davis or Davies, but he was not killed in a mine explosion. After that, she moved in with her cousin, who introduced her to prostitution. Mary Kelly moved to London in 1884 and met a French woman who ran a high-class brothel in Knightsbridge. She began making a lot of money and enjoying the finer things, including trips to Paris, beautiful dresses, and jewelry. As usual, that wouldn't last. She made her way to the East End of London, where she met Joseph Barnett in 1887. They got a 10 feet by 12 feet flat together, and she didn't work as a prostitute for a while. She was well-liked and described as well-educated and an artist, and friends said that she felt more superior to most people in her position of life. She was always dressed nice and was generally quiet until she got drinking. Like the others, she was an alcoholic. In mid-1888, Barnett lost his job and Kelly had to return to prostitution. In October, Barnett moved out of the flat, but the two remained on good terms, and he would often stop by every day to see her and check on her. He last saw her on November 8th around 7:30 p.m., and at 2 a.m. on November 9th, she was seen entering her residence at Miller's Court with a man. At 10:45 the next day, her body was discovered in her room. A photo taken inside her flat may be the very first ever crime scene photo ever taken. Sorry, fun fact, but not so fun at the same time. She was 25 years old and the youngest victim of the Whitechapel murder. She was buried with very little notice on November 19th, 1888. And after you're done, I have victimology for you.
Okay. Sorry, you see, yeah, she was discovered at 10:45 on November 9th by her landlord and his assistant. The assistant actually had to go break through the window, and he ran back to the landlord. Sorry, I covered some stuff that you did.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Happens when you have the same research material.
So the assistant ran back to the landlord after seeing the horrific scene. And this is a quote, "The sight we saw I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked more the working of a devil than a man. I had heard a great deal about the Whitechapel murders, but I declare to God I had never expected to see such a sight as this.
Remember that line for later. I got something to say.
The whole scene is more than I can describe. I hope I may never see such a sight again." Walter Dew was first on scene. On the bed was all that remained of a young woman. There was little left of her, not much more than a skeleton. Her face was terribly scarred and mutilated. All this was horrifying enough, but the mental picture of that sight, which remains most vividly with me, is the poor woman's eyes. They were wide open and seemed to be staring straight at me with a look of terror. Police delayed entering the room as they believed they were waiting for the bloodhounds in hopes to catch a scent of the killer. At 1:30, they discovered the hounds were not being brought and were told to force open the door with a pickaxe. What they saw and smelt that afternoon would haunt many of those present for years. Attending doctors later told journalists that he had seen a great deal in dissecting rooms, but had never witnessed such a horrible sight. Police and doctors spent the next few hours completing their inspection. This horrific and haunting image still exists. And like Sarah said, it was the earliest crime scene photos. Just before 4 p.m. on Saturday, the body was brought to the mortuary by a horse and cart. What nobody could have realized at the time was that in the bloody carnage of all that tiny room in Miller's Court had reached its conclusion.
You missed one thing. Her intestines were draped over the mirror.
Over the mirror.
Yeah.
Remember that for
She was
later, too.
completely eviscerated. Like, every sexual organ was taken or mutilated, breasts, everything. It was the worst one out of all 5.
The most thorough, you could say.
definitely an escalation. So, yeah. So, what?
He had more than an hour that time.
Oh, yeah. Well, he had time. He had time because he had the room to himself. He was able to take the time and complete his fantasy out.
Yeah.
So what was it that Jack the Ripper found so intriguing about these specific victims? So we look to the victimology of the case. All victims were either prostitutes or were casual prostitutes. They all had moderate to severe alcoholism. They were all high-risk victims, which is based on how they lived their lives and in the place where they lived and worked. With the exception of the final victim, they were all homely, beaten down, and unattractive women in their 40s. The critical findings that linked the 5 murders is that there was no evidence of sexual assault. They were killed rather quickly, with the exception of Mary Jane Kelly. Organs were removed from the victims, with the exception of Elizabeth Stride, as the offender was interrupted. This indicates some knowledge of anatomy or curiosity. No evidence of physical torture before death. Severe post-mortem mutilation. There was manual strangulation. Small concentrations of blood was found. Rings were taken from at least 2 victims. And Kelly was the only one killed indoors, had the worst mutilation, meaning the offender was able to spend the most time with her. And the time of death was always in the very early mornings, usually taking place on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and the odd Monday bank holiday.
Huh, I never noticed that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all Friday, Saturday,
And then
there was
on
one
a
bank
Monday bank holiday, which suggests that this unsub or unknown subject or offender, whoever you want to say,
Had the weekends off.
most likely
Unsub
means
means
unknown subject. So the unsub probably had a Monday to Friday job.
Huh.
Yes.
Or something else.
Which leads us to the profile, shall we? Or did you have more? Or are you going to wait until I do the profile before you go into the suspects? So both Roy Hazelwood and Joy Douglas were called in to do a profile of Jack the Ripper on the 100th anniversary of the Whitechapel murders for a television special, which I saw, which is excellent. You can find it on the YouTube. They were given 2 large volumes of information on the case, which contained autopsy and police reports, background on each victim, maps which detailed the area, and the post-mortem photos. The post-mortem mutilator focuses on the victim's breast, abdomen, rectum, or genitals to express anger and frustration. These types of offenders are known as lust murderers instead of sexual sadists. Jack the Ripper was a lust murderer. Quote, "The lust murderer is unique and is distinguished from the sadistic homicide by the involvement of a mutilating attack or displacement of the breast, rectum, or genitals. Further, while there are always exceptions, basically 2 types of individuals commit the lust murder. These individuals will be labeled as organized, non-social, and the disorganized, asocial personalities," unquote, John Douglas. Disorganized offender, because he brought his own weapon, but the crime itself was messy and highly impetuous. He left his victims out in the open and made no attempts to conceal his crimes. The similarities between victims number 1 and 2 indicates that the same offender is responsible for these 2 murders, likely took the rings off one of his victims to take as a trophy in order to relive the murder. The post-mortem mutilation was the offender's physical display of tremendous hatred and fear of women. What he is doing by mutilating these women is his way to achieve psychosexual gratification. The offender moved on quickly after murdering Elizabeth Stride because he was unable to do what he needed to do in order to reach the psychosexual relief. He had to seek out another victim because he was left feeling unfulfilled. His first 4 victims were all a similar demographic. They were older, unattractive prostitutes and were all within the same general area, which would be known as the offender's comfort zone. So why target prostitutes? Most serial murderers select them because they are simply easy targets. They are readily available to them and they are vulnerable. A prostitute will go with anyone for money to any place at any time for any amount of time. Then in a lot of cases, sadly, they are not likely to be missed. And if they are, it's not instant like a mother being taken from the grocery store parking lot or the teenage girl walking home from cheer practice. It's sad, but it's unfortunately true. The offender was able to spend more time with his final known victim, Mary Kelly, because he was indoors, inside her flat. The offender was able to take his time and act out his deepest and darkest fantasies without any interruption. An escalation may be because the 3rd victim he was interrupted, and the 4th victim he didn't spend a lot of time with either, but got the job done. This offender is like an animal. He's hunting at night for his weak and susceptible prey. He killed them in a blitz attack, which leads us to believe he is socially awkward.
Awkward.
He kills opportunistically and likely returned to the scene of the murders or even visited the resting places of his victims. This would allow him to relive the murders or even feel superior over them. The offender is a white male with average intelligence. Age is the hardest to predict, but likely mid to late 20s. The offender would be single, never married, and likely didn't socialize with women at all. He would have trouble maintaining any relationships and would find it difficult to interact appropriately with anyone. He lived or worked in the Whitechapel area. Any job he might have had, he would have likely worked alone, and it would have been very menial. As a child, he likely fit at least 2 of the homicidal triad, which is bedwetting, setting fires, and cruelty to animals. This offender likely set fires and most definitely would have experimented on small animals. He came likely from a broken home with a dominant mother or adult female who physically and possibly sexually abused him. He would be socially withdrawn, a loner. He'd be unremarkable and likely blended into the neighborhood. Likely had poor hygiene and a disheveled appearance. Prefers the evening and night to be out. He's likely nocturnal. He finds women intimidating and they make him feel inadequate. He both hated and feared them. The way he subdued, murdered, and it is the act of disemboweling them, which would give him pleasure and would have savored it. By removing their sexual parts and organs, he was desexing them, making them into something he no longer feared. He was also humiliating them in their deaths. Police likely interviewed him during their investigation. The offender is using a blitz-style attack because he lacks the confidence and fears that he cannot control his victim. The stab wounds were frenzied, full of anger, but is also a way to release sexual tension. He did not know any of his victims, so the attacks were not personal. They were necessary to him. The fantasies were so strong in creating a never-ending need that they would interfere with his normal routine, possibly even his work. The offender is unsophisticated, violent, sexually immature, and had an inadequate personality. He was taking anatomical souvenirs, but what he was doing with them is subjective. Some say there's possibility of cannibalism, but that has not been, obviously, that can't be confirmed. As for the letters, because as many people know that there was letters sent to the police and to the media about this, calling himself Jack the Ripper. So as for the letters that were sent allegedly by the offender, the one who called himself Jack the Ripper, were not likely sent by the offender himself, because this type of offender would not have had the guts to challenge law enforcement the way these letters were doing. He would not want to draw any attention to himself. And between the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit and Scotland Yard looking deeply into the linguistics of these letters suggests that it was written by a reporter who knew the ins and outs of the way the print industry worked. The fact that they were literate and articulate suggests an organized offender. We already know that this offender is not.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. He would not be able to express his thoughts in a rational manner. He would not talk about future murders he was planning, which he did in one of the letters. The only thing on this offender's mind at all times is thinking about what he's going to do in the moment.
And from my research, that's correct.
Do you want to go into suspects or the other possible victims?
Why don't you finish off with the victims and then...
Okay. All right. So, Annie Millwood, 38-year-old and a widow, she, on on February... Remix, blah, 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 blah. On February... You said remix. On February... Fuck. Nah, I can't even.
Yeah.
On February 25th, 1888, she was admitted into the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary with stab wounds to the legs and lower parts of her abdomen. She claimed that she was attacked by a strange man with a clasp knife. Ada Wilson was a 39-year-old dressmaker and possible prostitute. She was in her room on March 28th, 1888, when there was a knock at her door. She opened the door to find a man about 30 years old and about 5'6" tall, with a fair mustache and sunburnt face. He threatened to kill her for money, and when she refused, he used a clasp knife and stabbed her twice in the throat. Emma Smith was 45-year-old and a widow. She was 5'2", fair complexion, with light brown hair and brown eyes, and had a scar on her right temple. Like the known 5 victims, she was also an alcoholic and a prostitute, who was attacked on April 2nd, 1888. She managed to make it to the infirmary. Her right ear was torn, her peritoneum and her other internal organs were ruptured. The doctor said he believed that the injuries had been caused by a blunt instrument being forced into her. She was first robbed of all her money and then assaulted, and she died 2 days later from her injuries. And this one Nancy brought up. Martha Tabram. She was born Martha White on May 10th, 1849, and she was the youngest of 5 children to Charles and Elizabeth White. When Martha was 16, her father abandoned the family and died in November 1865. She married Henry Samuel Tabram in 1869 and had 2 children, Frederick in 1871 and Charles in 1872. Like the others, she liked to indulge in her drinking habit, and Henry left her in 1875, but paid a weekly allowance of 12 shillings. Martha turned to prostitution, and once Henry found out, paid her less money. In 1879, she took up residence with William Turner, and Henry stopped paying her altogether. Turner was a carpenter, but jobs were sparse, so he and Martha made a living hawking cheap trinkets, menthol cones, needles, pins on the streets. They might have married, but there's nothing to prove this. Turner was last saw Martha on August 4th, 1888, and her body was found the next morning by John Saunders Reeves. She suffered 39 stab wounds to the throat and abdomen, indicated that 2 different blades were used. Like the other women, she was small, 5'3", with dark hair. So now we know that a lot of the victims were very small. Rose Mylett, on December 19th, 1888, she was seen with 2 soldiers. By 2:30 a.m. on the 20th, she was seen with 2 men and was quite drunk. Her body was later found at 4:30 a.m. There was no obvious signs of a struggle, but later the coroner's assistant discovered a mark around her neck, 1/8 of an inch deep, with some scratches around it. The death was ruled as strangulation. Some believe that Rose was not a victim of Jack the Ripper because the modus operandi was completely different. Alice Mackenzie was found at 12:15 a.m. on July 17, 1889, by police constable Walter Andrews. Alice was small, 5'4", with brown hair and brown eyes and fair complexion. It is unknown if she was a prostitute, but she was found with a clay pipe next to her, which was her nickname, Clay Pipe Alice.
That's original.
Right? Because she always smoked out of a clay pipe. Her body was identified by John McCormick, who lived with Alice for 6 to 7 years with his wife at common lodgings. Then there was the unidentified lady. The Pinchin Street torso. A partial body was discovered at 5:20 a.m. on September 10th, 1889, by a police constable. There was no head or lower limbs, and the hands looked to be in good shape. All organs were intact. The body looked to have been taken about 36 or more hours before it was discovered. The body was also found to where Elizabeth Stride was found, and if she was killed earlier, that would put her murder on the 8th of September, which would have been the same day as Annie Chapman's murder. The victim was never identified. And then finally, Francis Cole was found at 2:15 a.m. on Friday, February 13th, 1891, by Constable Ernest Thompson. He had passed the area 15 minutes before he found the body and noted that it was not there earlier. Blood was still flowing from the wound on the neck, which ran ear to ear. She was an alcoholic as well. Her father, James William Coles, and she had a sister named Mary Ann Coles.
All right, so now we go into the suspects.
Yeah, I got one.
There are so many theories about who was Jack the Ripper. Police surmise that the crimes may have been carried out by a gang. They figured one member wouldn't have been able to keep their mouth shut. 2 can keep a secret if one is dead. Their assumption is right. The kills were too messy for a group or gang to commit, and what use would they have for internal organs? Medical knowledge. With the dissections, it looked as if the offender likely had medical knowledge. It takes skill to know exact organs and knowledge to know where said organs are, which is very true. I never thought about that when I was doing all this research. Granted, an educated person with even basic knowledge knows where the heart is located, or even the uterus. Could have been a medical student who failed or dropped out of med school. The murders were disorganized, messy, which to most offenders who had medical knowledge would not have been as messy. I'm going to giggle a little bit.
Oh, probably.
Thomas Cutbush. And I'm a 14-year-old boy.
Sorry. I actually put that in there just to see if you were.
Cutbush was named a Ripper suspect in the media around 1894. Like, you can have, like...
Any name?
No, but, like, we you know, in our professional lives, we're very, you know, we're professional and we know our shit, and then we get here and we sit talking about, like, somebody named Cutbush, and I can't keep a straight face, and we're talking about a suspect in a murder.
It's like the scene in New Girl season 2 where she loses her job. She's like, I had a student in my summer school class whose name was Vaj Rajuv, and I never laughed once.
Right?
Vaj Rajuv. Like, come on. Cutbush. And of course I wrote it a lot, too.
You did. He had displayed many behavioral problems and was unable to hold a steady job. During the day, he would isolate himself and read medical books. It was also presumed that he contracted... Sorry, to page turn. We really do need teleprompters.
Yeah.
Syphilis from prostitutes in 1888. As his behavior became more erratic, he was institutionalized, but he escaped 4 days later. He was convicted in 1891 of stabbing 2 women in the ass. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I wrote this for her because she didn't have time to complete her research. And I'm like, oh, it's all professional and everything. And then I have to add ass instead of buttocks because that's what was written down. I'm like, well, at least I should change it to make it sound more like us. So I wrote ass instead of buttocks. So it sounds all professional, great with big words, and then you get ass. So that's us.
I very much appreciate this.
You're welcome.
But Chief Inspector of Scotland Yard, Sir Melville McNaughton, rejected Cutbush being the killer, stating that Jack the Ripper committed only 5 murders. Montague John Druitt. Druitt was a barrister and also worked to supplement his income as an assistant schoolmaster at a boarding school. There was relatively strong evidence against him that points to the possibility of Druitt being Jack the Ripper. His own family believed him to be the murderer. His hatred towards women, especially prostitutes, removed to an asylum after displaying homicidal ideations.
As you saw, I made a notation here because Matt and I kind of discussed this a little bit earlier. I like the fact that their version of strong evidence was because the family said so. Right? So I don't know. In my opinion, I don't consider that strong evidence. Excuse me. I do think that there was probably more evidence just base than what I wrote down. Because that's all I could find on such short notice. But if McNaughton's view was that the most evidence they had, the most damaging evidence was because his family thought he was capable of doing this, to me that's not suitable evidence. That's hearsay, opinionated. And if Matt brought up a good theory or a good point earlier, that if the family had any ill will towards him, like found him to be an outcast or he had pissed them off in some way, yeah, they're going to point to him, right? Like, they have no reason not to. So to me, it's not concrete enough evidence to point towards Montague Druitt.
I would say the same. Druitt would commit suicide after the murder of Mary Kelly, the Ripper's last victim. But despite many of Druitt's family members were doctors, Druitt himself was not. This doesn't mean he didn't have any medical knowledge, as I'm sure he did, but in conversation only. And although Chief Inspector McNaughton surmised that, quote, the murderer's brain gave way altogether after his awful guilt.
Glut.
That's what was written. In Miller's court, and that he immediately committed suicide, end quote. This is not the case with Druitt over the unsub. Druitt was said to be fine the days following the murder of Mary Kelly and was working as a barrister and at the school up to 3 weeks after the last murder. The offender would not have committed suicide but wouldn't have been fascinating enough to just resume his normal everyday activities. It's more likely Druitt committed suicide over his dismissal from the school at the end of November 1888. Also, Druitt had no known connection to Whitechapel. The royal connection. Mm-hmm. Prince Albert Victor was the grandson of Queen Victoria and was second in line to the throne. He was seen as disappointment to the royals as he had a lackluster military career, pathetic personality, and possible homosexual tendencies. Oh no, not that!
Back in those days, yes.
Prince Albert Victor was first brought to light as a possible Jack the Ripper suspect in 1962. Or 18...
No, 19.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Prince Albert Victor may have contracted syphilis in the West Indies, which began to decline the prince's mental health, causing him to become insane, seeking revenge on prostitutes. There really is no evidence connecting Prince Albert Victor, but the theory is still a very talked about one. The prince died in
1892.
Okay. Sorry, brain fart there for a second. I was like, 1962, but 18... Okay. So he died in 1892 of influenza. Sir William Gull was a physician to the royal family in 1871 to help the Prince of Wales overcome a bout of typhoid fever. He was then appointed physician in what is that?
Ordinary.
An ordinary to Queen Victoria. Do you know enough to know what that means? Okay.
What that means.
Gull's connection to Whitechapel murders stemmed from many articles about the murderer having a high medical standing. Allegations that one of Gull's patients was the Whitechapel murderer, which made everyone presume that patient was Prince Albert Victor. This theory was based on Sir William Gull's private papers. Other theories involving Gull include that the royal family ordered Gull to clean up Prince Albert Victor's mess by ridding the streets of the prostitutes the prince may have, quote, dated, so they wouldn't talk about the prince's dalliances.
Big word.
How do I pronounce it? Aaron Kosminski was a Jewish-Polish immigrant who arrived in England in the 1880s. He worked as a barber and hairdresser in Whitechapel. Between 1888 and 1891, 11 women were murdered and linked together in the Whitechapel area. Kosminski became a suspect based on the fact that he had an extreme hatred of women with a strong homicidal tendencies. Kosminski was placed in an asylum in 1894 and that he'd been ill since 1885. His insanity took form of an auditory hallucination, a paranoid fear of being fed by others, which led him to eat food that was dropped on the ground and refusal to bathe or wash. Also listed as the cause of his insanity as self-abuse.
Also known as masturbation.
Oh.
Yeah.
Not what I would think of when you say self-abuse.
Well, apparently it's a euphemism for masturbation, and back then that would be considered probably a sin.
Well, you gotta turn your music off, though.
I'm an expert in that.
Yeah, I don't want to get copyright. So that was self-abuse back then?
Yes.
Is jerking off as self-abuse? Wow, that is... Whoo, I'm so hard on myself.
Matt's got to go to the insane asylum now.
Jerking off is self-abuse?
Back in the 1800s.
It's because in the Catholic religion, it's
It's a sin.
it's a sin.
You can know that.
He also
Pleasure
threatened.
yourself?
He also threatened his sister, or sister of a witness, with a knife. DNA evidence taken in 2014 from a shawl, that was found with the victim Catherine Eddowes, and it extracted mitochondrial DNA that matched female descendants of Kosminski's sister, with the first stand showing a 99.2% match and the second showing a perfect 100% match.
Wow.
Kosminski died of gangrene of the leg at age 53 in a London mental hospital in 1919.
So mitochondrial DNA is your female strand. So everybody has mitochondrial DNA. It comes from your mother.
Yay.
So it's the easiest strand to break down when you do DNA testing. So a lot of the times you'll see for the genetic genealogy, mitochondrial DNA is what's used to help construct the family tree, which you would think is kind of weird because women change their last names, they get married, things change. But actually it's the easiest one to
well, it makes sense too
isolate.
because the baby grows in the mom,
yes,
right?
there's more of a connection.
There's going to be a stronger percentage of mom DNA. I know it's 50-50, but you know what I mean. It's going to be more concentrated, I guess.
It's easier to isolate. It's the more dominant DNA strand as far as from what my knowledge is.
One more. David Cohen. Cohen was a 23-year-old Jewish-Polish immigrant who lived in the Whitechapel area in 1888. He was placed into Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum. Wow. How far we've come. In December 1888, which coincided with the end of the murders. He was an unmarried tailor, described as violently antisocial and poor East End local. He displayed many violent and destructive behaviors while at the asylum and had to be restrained. FBI profile John Douglas, that based on the behavioral clues, point to a person who was known to the police as David Cohen or someone very much like him.
And that leads us to our theories. So, I don't know if Matt has developed his theory yet, but I will do mine. So, my theory is based more on the profile. I am in firm belief that the offender of the 5 murders, and I'm only going off of the 5 known murders. The offender is someone who would have had reason to stop the murders after Mary Kelly's. There are very few reasons why a serial offender will actually stop. Either they were arrested for something unrelated, they died, or they moved. Which then you would expect that a whole new set of murders would start up. In this case, I believe the offender was likely to suffer a psychotic break after the Kelly murder. As we know, that scene was a lot more chaotic than the rest. The offender spent more time with her, lived out his ultimate fantasy, and then probably didn't know what to do with himself. I know Nancy went over some of the suspects that have come up over the decades. As much as we all love a royal family conspiracy, I do not believe that Prince Albert Victor had anything to do with this, and the same goes for Sir William Gull. The area was full of immigrants who may have had trouble fitting in. They too were living in poverty-stricken conditions and probably struggled. The offender had an extreme hatred towards women. Therefore, my belief is that Aaron Kosminski, a Jewish-Polish immigrant who was a barber and hairdresser who lived right in the Whitechapel area. Kosminski had a history of mental issues and was starting to worsen by 1890. He hadn't worked for years prior to this. He was institutionalized after suffering a major psychotic break and was diagnosed as psychotic with homicidal tendencies as well as possible schizophrenia. He was suffering from auditory hallucinations and exhibited paranoia towards people who tried to feed him. For years, he would walk the streets and pick up discarded food scraps off the ground, and he also had horrible hygiene, which kind of goes with what Hazelwood and Douglas had pointed out in their profile earlier.
Yeah.
So, with that said, I fully believe that Kosminski makes the most sense in terms of a logical suspect.
Nancy in your pantsy?
You have a theory?
No, I was just overwhelmed with the gruesomeness.
Okay. Ready? Is it my turn? You
Yes.
guys had ammo entirely now?
Yes.
Yeah? You're spent?
Yes, it's your theory.
Yeah.
Okay. So, there's two other conspiracy theories.
Oh, you've been dying for this, haven't you?
Like I said, I've been waiting for this one for a long time. One of them is does anybody have a smoke? One of them is a man of the cloth. So a religious figure, a priest, a pastor, even someone coming up in the ranks to be one of those things. Because like you said, they're 20-something years old. They're seeing these women as straight-out sinners, carriers of disease, and a plague on mankind. So nightly, they're going out and killing these women and removing their parts that are the most sinful.
Makes sense.
Like their mouth.
No, worse. Yeah, they were tearing off lesbian lips, not lesbians. Well, maybe lesbians. I don't know if you're tearing off lips. Well, if you pay enough, shit, it'd probably swing both right ways. I'm a vegetarian. Yeah. Where was I? So the one theory is the man of the cloth going out cleaning up the streets to make things less corrupted, less unholy, that kind of thing.
Maybe he was a member of the LDS, because apparently they blood atonements, but you'll learn about that in the cult.
Yeah, we'll get there when we get there. The other one, which made me go, huh, was that one step further. It was still along the religious line. However, it was a point in history where man was most corrupt and most unclean, that it actually manifested a demon which went around and claimed the women of the night who were sinning and drinking and all this kind of stuff, reclaiming the organs as sinful atonements and dragging their souls to hell. Which explains the dismemberments and stuff like that. If it's a monstrous beast that we would think a demon, stereotypically looks like, it would be slashed apart. It would know where those organs are because,
They have them in glass jars on the shelf.
Yeah. But like a demon would show up and destroy these things and then disappear without a trace. And they don't find any trace of it because it's disappeared from the plane. The sun came up. You said they're found at 3 a.m?
Early mornings, yes.
Yeah.
My only, I can probably discount part of that. I don't imagine a demon would leave things
Also,
as messy.
he said they arranged, it looked like it was done ritually, which would be something a demon would do or someone who's possessed. Also, the items were placed around the body.
In at least one case, yes.
Yeah, so in that one case, the items were placed around the body. Usually in older times, especially going back that far, what they would do is put pennies over the eyes to pay the boatman to your trip to the afterlife. Well, there was 2 coins there. However, they were not placed on the eyes. They were placed outside of the body surrounding it. I wouldn't even be surprised if you started tracing lines between each one of those items that you would get a pentagram out of it or something like that if it was ritualistic that way, right? Satanist or what have you?
I do. Sorry. I do have a picture of a map of all of the different locations of the murders.
Yeah.
For you to place when you put this online.
Where are these murders taking place?
This is all in London. We're talking
Whitechapel.
about Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think,
Kevin's here now.
Yeah.
I told him to come over.
I think a demon probably would leave less messier of a scene. They would be able to extract the organs without cutting the woman open because they would have that power, that ability to do so.
Not if they're the animalistic type of slash, shred, tear.
Yeah, I guess it depends, but I don't see that happening. Also, I don't
And
know.
not a lot of blood because they would have eaten it.
Well, they also would have been strangled first, so the blood would have stopped flowing to begin
Yeah,
with.
well, yeah.
A demon's just going to cut you open like a raptor would, right across and spill everything out, right?
But, like,
They're not going to be
you
that
also have
kind.
to think of the possibility of it being a demon that's possessing a human body,
Fair enough.
right?
Fair enough.
So those are the 2 theories I heard of that I figured neither of you would have gotten just because
We didn't
these-
go into conspiracies
well, yeah,
necessarily,
and
other
these
than
conspiracy
the royal one.
theories, they all come and go. I saw conspiracy theories that I saw like 2 or 3 years ago, and when I go to look them up, you can't find them anymore. They're not part of the algorithm anymore. They've been moved on, right? So it's always hard to find things like that. There was the one case we had of something. Even Mandela effect stuff is getting hard to find, and I'm wondering if that's because someone's scrubbing the internet.
Well, it's possible, but that's a conspiracy theory on its own, is it not?
Ooh. What is Google doing to your search results?
I don't know, but if anybody looked at my my Google searches, I'd probably be arrested.
There was another
It's all
theory.
for research, people.
There was another theory that Jack the Ripper was actually like a vigilante type, cleaning up the streets of those kind of things and not being a religious thing, just getting rid of criminals and stuff like that.
Yeah, but then the victim pool would have changed.
It would have been more men.
They would have
Yeah.
also gone after the Johns, the people paying for the
Yeah.
sex.
Yeah.
From-
Instead, they're just going for the
Right,
prostitutes.
they're just going for the prostitutes. There was also the theory that you brought up earlier was a woman. Jack the Ripper was a
Right.
female, which I discounted, saying that they would not get that up close and personal.
You
another
said
woman.
most women don't get that up close and
Most
personal,
women,
but
there's
there's
really
always
no
that
history
one.
of it doing it. Like history of women eviscerating another woman. That's
Unless Jack the
generally.
Ripper is the first.
it
And
would be the
only.
only.
Yeah.
But I think that's illogical because most women are more organized offenders. They're not going to leave their victims. Hey, look it! I left a victim here.
The other thing that led into the demon part was they never found the sexual organs, and that was because they were consumed.
Well, that's that. If you're insane enough, and if you look at Kosminski, he won't take food from people, but he'll take it off the ground. Who's to say he's not taking this stuff out of the women and consuming it? Because
Yeah.
that would be part of insanity, right?
Yeah.
What's the word? Cannibalism.
Cannibalism.
is part of insanity.
Yeah.
No sane person would be willing to eat another person unless you're probably on a mountain after a plane crash. The Donner Party comes to mind. Kind of situation where you have to.
Well, and there's
Doesn't mean you
tribes that
want
still
to.
do, I think.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean you want to.
Yeah.
You can get so many diseases from eating another people, like Creutzfeldt-Jakob.
Unless you're a tribe that's been doing that your whole existence. And
Again, but that would be
I can't believe they're still out there.
less likely to happen in Whitechapel in England.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, I was sitting here all podcast going, oh, I got to get this demon thing on the table, too. But I wanted to see if it was going to be part of your stuff. I knew how much research both of you did, so I didn't want to step on any toes, so I held on to it. That's why you saw me twiddling my lighter. I'm like, oh, they're
He's
talking
anxious.
about things that go into it. Oh, yeah, everything was done ritualistically. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it looked almost supernatural. Yeah, I bet it did. So, like, I'm sitting here, like, just, not being able to contain.
It's weird because normally when I do true crime that's unsolved and I want theories, you don't normally say anything.
Well, that's
and I
because
want you to.
this one had the conspiracy thing, and that's what the Mystery Matt is all about, the conspiracies, and are they true or are they not true? In this case, I'm probably more likely to lean towards that one guy that you mentioned over an actual demon, because less reports were saying things about demons when you actually look into it. It was all police report, things of that nature.
So
right?
a lot of the times, the whole David Cohen and Aaron Kosminski thing, because they're both Polish Jewish immigrants, they're both in the same area. A lot of people say that they got them backwards, like they misidentified one as another. That maybe it was David Cohen who did do this, and apparently he is capable of doing it from the sounds of it.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility that it's either Kosminski or Cohen who were involved in the murders, or it was another possible Polish Jewish immigrant. And they would have been the witnesses that have pointed towards that being a Polish Jewish immigrant, without actually saying whom they thought it was, described the person, and it looked like either one of these guys. They're not likely, even if they knew the names of these people, they're not going to say it because they have an immense fear of police and law enforcement, and it would be against them because they're all kind of together, right? They don't want to put that label on them.
Yeah.
So it to me, it makes more sense going towards Cohen or Kosminski. So yeah, that's where I stand. And the DNA evidence, I'm not sure how accurate that information was. I mean, it's the first time I had come across it since doing this was just today. And I was kind of shocked by it because I never saw it in any findings before that there was any DNA. And DNA from 136 years ago, even though this 136 subtract 126 years ago would be highly degraded. Yeah. Not completely impossible to get DNA out of,
but really bad.
Degraded. And we didn't really have that technology until around 2017, 2018 when genetic genealogy came in play.
Well, they had it before, but it was harder to do and more expensive.
It wasn't used. And the first case that was done with genetic genealogy was the Golden State Killer. Right? So this would basically say, no, we just did it here with this case. So how accurate are these findings in terms of the mitochondrial DNA?
Yeah.
I mean, also, how well preserved was that shell? Was it handled? How many times was it handled?
Yeah. Did she touch it?
Did somebody sweat on it when they were looking at it? Like, were they taking precautions with gloves? There goes the squirrel. Squirrel. Actual squirrel.
Literal.
Yeah.
Literally.
So that's another thing. Did they use gloves when they were doing crime scene cleanup and stuff like
probably
that?
not.
Probably not, because I don't know if they had rubber gloves back then or what kind of gloves they would use.
I don't think they would.
Would they fabric gloves? Because then you're leaving fiber particles behind. So, again, the forensics that they do have now is subjective, in my opinion. Don't come for me.
So we're good?
Yeah.
Everybody's happy?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us on this special extra long coverage of Jack the Ripper. We hope to see you come back next week for something completely different. Secret societies. Don't tell nobody. Shh. Secret.